The moment you disappear completely, she doesn't lose you. She loses access to how you made her feel. At first, she thinks the breakup is just about space, about distance, about time apart. She believes she's only losing a person, not an experience. And that's why cutting her off hits so differently than anything she expected, because what actually disappears from her life isn't just your presence, it's the emotional access she had to you. When you were still there, even in a limited way, she could still feel connected. She could still reach out, still get reassurance, still feel your attention, your energy, your emotional availability. Even if things weren't perfect, she had emotional access. And that access gave her a sense of safety, a sense of importance, a sense that you were still part of her emotional world. The moment you cut her off, that emotional bridge collapses. Suddenly, she can't check in on you. She can't text you when she's bored. She can't lean on your emotional presence. She can't feel that familiar comfort anymore. And that's when the real loss hits, not intellectually, but emotionally, because emotional access is addictive. It creates attachment without effort. It allows someone to feel connected without having to commit, invest, or risk anything. And most people don't realize how much they rely on that emotional access until it's gone. She might tell herself she's fine. She might even feel relieved at first. No more emotional expectations, no more conversations to manage, no more responsibilities. But what she doesn't see yet is that she also lost emotional regulation. You were someone she used to emotionally stabilize herself with. Your presence grounded her, your attention validated her, your reactions reassured her. Without that, something shifts internally. She starts feeling unsettled in moments where she used to feel calm. She feels more emotionally reactive, more sensitive, more uncertain, because the emotional anchor she leaned on is no longer available. And now she has to sit with her emotions instead of outsourcing them to you. This is why cutting her off creates a deeper impact than staying friends ever could. Staying in her life allows her to slowly detach. Cutting her off forces emotional shock. It removes the emotional supply instantly, and the nervous system doesn't respond to logic. It responds to loss of connection. That's when she starts feeling the absence in her body, not just her mind. The emptiness, the restlessness, the urge to reach out, not because she wants the relationship back, but because she wants access to the emotional state you gave her. She misses the feeling before she misses the person. And that's the part she never expected, because she thought losing you would be about memories. But what she actually lost was emotional availability, a source of validation, comfort, familiarity, and connection that was always there. When that disappears without warning, without gradual detachment, without emotional closure, it creates a psychological gap. And the mind always wants to return to what once made it feel safe. So the regret doesn't come from missing you. It comes from losing access to how she felt when you were there. At the beginning, she doesn't feel the loss the way you might expect. In fact, she often feels the opposite. She feels lighter, relieved, free. Without constant communication, without emotional responsibility, without having to think about your feelings, her nervous system finally relaxes. She tells herself this is what peace feels like. This is what she needed: space, independence, clarity. And because of that, she assumes cutting you off won't affect her much. She believes distraction will do the job. Friends, social media, work, new conversations, new attention, all of it keeps her mind occupied. As long as something is happening, she doesn't have to feel what's actually underneath. But distraction only works when there's stimulation. The moment life slows down, something changes, a quiet evening, a long drive, a weekend with no plans, and suddenly there's nothing to hide behind. No noise, no emotional input, no one checking in, no one grounded in her emotional world. That's when silence starts doing its work. Silence doesn't distract, it exposes. It removes external stimulation and forces internal awareness. And when there's no one left to project feelings onto, emotions finally surface. The nervous system notices the absence. The emotional brain starts scanning for familiarity. And the first thing it reaches for is you, not because she planned to think about you, but because you were the last consistent emotional presence. You were the reference point her mind associated with connection, comfort, and emotional stimulation. And now that stimulation is gone, this is where regret quietly begins. Not dramatic regret, not emotional breakdown, just a subtle discomfort that grows, a feeling of emptiness she can't explain, a sense that something is missing from her emotional environment. She might label it boredom, or loneliness, or restlessness. But the truth is simpler. She's finally feeling the emotional absence that distraction was hiding. This is why cutting her off works so powerfully on a psychological level, because it removes emotional noise, it forces stillness, and stillness forces reflection. Without messages, without updates, without interaction, there's no new emotional input to replace the old one. So the mind goes back to what it knows, and that's when she starts replaying memories, not because she wants to go back, but because her emotional system is searching for regulation. It remembers how it used to feel, the emotional rhythm, the familiar energy, the sense of being emotionally anchored. She might not even miss you consciously. She just feels off, less grounded, less connected, less emotionally alive. And that feeling grows over time because silence keeps reminding her of what's gone. This is the part most people misunderstand. Regret doesn't come from losing the relationship. It comes from being forced to feel what distraction was protecting her from. It comes from finally sitting with emotional absence instead of emotional stimulation. And when someone is forced to feel a loss they avoided for weeks or months, the emotional impact hits deeper because now it's real, now it's embodied, now it's internal. So while she thought cutting you off would make things easier, it actually removes the one thing that was keeping her comfortable, emotional distraction. And once it's gone, the silence makes sure she finally feels the truth. At first, she assumes you're replaceable, not in a cruel way, but in a human way. The mind always believes what it can be found again. Another connection, another personality, another emotional experience. She tells herself there are plenty of options, plenty of people, plenty of chances to feel the same way again. So when you disappear, she doesn't panic. She expects life to fill the gap. And in the beginning, it seems like it does. New conversations, new attention, new faces. The novelty creates stimulation, and stimulation creates the illusion of replacement. Everything feels fresh, light, interesting. She feels wanted again, desired again, entertained again. But then something subtle starts happening. The excitement doesn't last. The conversations feel shallow. The emotional connection feels inconsistent. The energy feels off, and without realizing it, she starts comparing, not consciously at first, just emotionally, how she feels now versus how she felt with you. This is where you become the standard, not because you were perfect, but because you were familiar. You knew her emotional patterns, you understood her moods, you knew when to push and when to pull back. You didn't just interact with her, you were emotionally calibrated to her, and that's rare. Most new people don't have that emotional attunement. They're either too eager, too distant, too reactive, too unsure. They don't match the emotional rhythm she was used to. And even if they're attractive, successful, or interesting, something still feels missing. So her mind's referencing not your face, not your words, but the emotional experience, the way she felt around you, the emotional safety, the grounded energy, the sense of being emotionally seen. And the more she meets new people who can't replicate that feeling, the more your absence becomes noticeable. This is where regret begins to deepen. Because now it's not about losing you, it's about realizing what you represented. A level of emotional connection she assumed was easy to find, but now realizes is rare. And the more time passes, the clearer the pattern becomes. She keeps meeting people, but none of them create the same internal response. And that's when the internal dialogue shifts. She stops thinking, I'll find someone better, and starts thinking, why doesn't this feel the same? This is emotional comparison at work. And emotional comparison always favors the person who created the deepest emotional imprint, not the loudest, not the most dramatic, but the one who made someone feel understood, calm, and emotionally grounded. That's why cutting her off amplifies this effect, because there's no new emotional data from you, no updated version, no new flaws to focus on. The memory stays idealized, the emotional imprint stays clean, and every new connection is judged against that internal standard. So without trying, without chasing, without saying a word, you become the emotional benchmark her mind keeps using. And the more people fail to match it, the more she realizes she didn't just lose a relationship, she lost a level of emotional connection she can't easily replace. And once someone becomes your emotional standard, they don't fade. They quietly define every connection that comes after. One of the deepest psychological shifts that happens when you cut her off is the change in power, not in a loud, obvious way, but in a subtle, internal way that her ego feels immediately. When you were still accessible, even emotionally, she had a sense of control. She knew she could reach you. She knew she could get a response. She knew you were still part of her emotional environment. And that alone gave her comfort. Even if she didn't want you back, even if she was unsure about her feelings, Just knowing she could access you kept her ego stable. It meant she wasn't really losing you, she was just choosing distance. The power dynamic was still in her hands, but the moment you cut her off completely, that illusion collapses. Now she can't check in. She can't test your feelings. She can't see if you still care. She can't use your attention to regulate her emotions. And for the ego, this is deeply uncomfortable because the ego doesn't fear loss, it fears loss of control. She no longer knows where she stands with you. She doesn't know what you're thinking. She doesn't know if you miss her. She doesn't know if she still matters in your emotional world. And that uncertainty creates internal tension. The mind wants closure, certainty, reassurance, but cutting her off gives none of that. So the ego starts searching. She replays conversations. She analyzes the breakup. She wonders what you're doing. She imagines scenarios, not because she wants to obsess, but because her mind is trying to regain emotional control. It wants to feel relevant again. It wants to know it still has influence. This is where regret quietly begins forming through ego, not emotion. She might tell herself she's fine. She might act indifferent. But internally, the lack of access creates a psychological itch, a sense of unfinished business. Because when someone removes themselves without explanation, without drama, without chasing, it creates a vacuum the ego can't resolve. She's no longer the one choosing distance. Distance has been chosen for her. And that's what the ego struggles with, not the loss of you, the loss of the position she had in your emotional world, the fact that she's no longer the reference point, no longer the one being considered, no longer the one with emotional leverage. This is why cutting her off is so different from arguing, explaining, or staying friends. Those things keep her in control. Cutting her off removes her role entirely, and the ego hates irrelevance more than rejection. So she starts feeling something that doesn't look like missing you, but actually is curiosity, restlessness, the urge to check your profile, the urge to ask about you, the urge to reach out just to see. All of it is driven by the same internal need to restore a sense of emotional significance. Because when someone can't access you anymore, can't influence you, can't emotionally locate themselves in your life, the ego feels displaced, and displacement creates discomfort, and that discomfort slowly transforms into reflection, curiosity, and eventually regret, because the mind always wants to return to where it once felt powerful, relevant, and emotionally secure. At the beginning, her confidence feels real. She believes she made the right decision. She feels strong for choosing herself, proud for walking away, certain that life will reward her for following her emotions. And for a while, that confidence carries her. It protects her from doubt. It shields her from reflection. It keeps the story simple. Leaving was necessary, and everything ahead will be better. But time has a way of softening certainty. As weeks turn into months, the emotional intensity fades. The adrenaline of change disappears. The distractions lose their effect. And what's left is an excitement in space, space to think, space to question. This is where reflection begins, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that happens in still moments, late nights, long drives, ordinary days that feel slightly emptier than they used to. And in those moments, she starts revisiting the past, not to blame, but to understand. She asks herself different questions now. Not why didn't it work, but what did I really lose? She remembers the consistency you offered, the emotional safety, the way you showed up even when things weren't perfect. And slowly she realizes something uncomfortable. What she left behind wasn't chaos, it was stability. At first, she thought stability was boring, predictable, too safe. She wanted something more exciting, more emotional, more intense. But now she sees the difference between excitement and connection, between chemistry and compatibility, between attention and presence. And this is where regret takes shape because now she understands that what she had with you wasn't easy to find. It wasn't replaceable. It wasn't common. It was rare, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It was grounded. It was emotionally safe. And those things don't feel valuable until they're gone. She starts recognizing patterns in her new experiences, short lived connections, inconsistent people, emotional highs followed by emotional emptiness. And each time something ends, she feels a little more tired, a little more disconnected, a little more aware that what she walked away from wasn't the problem, it was the anchor. This is the moment where confidence turns into humility. She stops defending her decision emotionally. She stops rewriting the story to protect her ego. She stops blaming circumstances. and she starts taking emotional responsibility. She sees that she may have confused temporary feelings with long term reality, that she may have chased novelty instead of depth, that she may have underestimated what she had because it felt familiar. And familiarity, ironically, is what makes people undervalue connection. This is why time is such a powerful force in regret, because time removes emotional noise, it strips away distraction, it leaves only patterns and outcomes. And when someone keeps repeating experiences that feel empty while remembering one that felt real, the mind starts connecting the dots. So it doesn't arrive as pain, it arrives as understanding. A quiet realization that she may have walked away from something meaningful before she truly understood its value. And once someone reaches that level of clarity, the past no longer feels closed, it feels unresolved. By the time she reaches this stage, the emotional battle inside her is no longer about the past, it's about the present. She's no longer trying to convince herself she made the right choice. She's no longer distracted by novelty. She's no longer blaming circumstances or timing. What's left is a quiet, persistent emotional truth: she can't ignore, you still matter. And that's when the urge to reach out begins, not impulsively, not dramatically, but carefully, cautiously, almost strategically. She doesn't want to expose too much. She doesn't want to look vulnerable. She doesn't want to admit regret. So the message is usually simple, casual, neutral, something that seems harmless on the surface. A reaction to a story, a question about something small, but emotionally it's never small. That message carries everything she's been suppressing: curiosity, doubt, nostalgia, regret, a desire for emotional reconnection. It's not really about conversation, it's about testing whether the emotional door is still open. Because what scares her most isn't rejection, it's indifference. If you respond warmly, she feels relief, validation, emotional familiarity, a sense that the bond still exists. If you respond coldly or not at all, the reality hits. She didn't just lose access, she lost relevance. And that's where the emotional weight becomes real. This is the moment where emotion finally beats ego, where pride no longer protects her from honesty, where she accepts that pretending she doesn't care feels worse than admitting she still does. And here's the key point most people miss: she doesn't reach out because she's weak. She reaches out because she's emotionally aware, because the mind can suppress feelings, but it can't erase emotional memory. And when emotional memory stays active for long enough, it demands resolution. She wants closure or reconnection, or at least emotional confirmation that what you shared wasn't imagined, that it mattered, that it was real. This is why cutting her off is so powerful, because it forces the entire emotional process to happen internally. There's no feedback loop, no validation, no reassurance. She has to face her feelings alone. And when someone processes loss alone, the emotional impact is deeper, clearer, and more honest. So when she finally reaches out, it's not random. It's the result of emotional accumulation, of silence, of reflection, of comparison, of ego discomfort, of emotional absence, of regret. And the message itself is just the final symptom. The real story happened long before, in the quiet moments where she realized that losing access to you didn't just change her life, it changed how she feels about the past.